So a couple things we're going to do here is we're going to take apart the crossover valve assembly. This crossover valve connects each of the two chambers by opening and twisting to open, pulling, rotating quarter, and it closes, pulling back out and rotating either the same direction, either direction, a quarter turn, opens or closes. We have to make sure we hit the, that we get a specific clicking noise that indicates whether it's open or closed. What we're going to do is we'll actually take apart this crossover valve assembly and pull it out of these two flanges to look to inspect to make sure we have proper O-rings and seating and all that. What we'll need in order to do it are two crescent wrenches. One bigger one, and one smaller one would be preferred as well. You want to be careful not to mar the black coating, so you can wrap it with green tape is one way to do it, or wrap the crescent wrenches, or just be careful with how you do it. Work on this one crossover valve that connects these two chambers. We want to isolate these, separate them from the additional chambers. So we'll make sure that this one forward chamber, that the valve is actually closed. And then what we'll be doing is deflating the pressure in here because we'll be creating two large openings in here. There's a baffle that separates the two chambers right here. And so what we're going to do is go ahead and remove some of the air from the two chambers, not all of it, but some of it so that we can work on these two chambers and take some of the pressure off the valves, off the flanges. This serves as a smaller nut, that's a bigger nut, and those are what hold everything together. Both the banjo fitting with the hose together to this assembly and the assembly into the flange itself. So we're going to attach the smaller adjustable wrench onto the smaller nut, the bigger one onto the bigger one, and we're going to go ahead and use this to hold it and spin this loose. You want to be careful not to bend this hose too much, just because it'll have a tendency to rotate down. Sometimes you may need to get either your own hand or a second pair of hands just to help stabilize the hose and hold it upwards. And here you see this whole assembly is starting to come out. I'll take a little bit of pressure off it because there's still air inside the chamber, not much. But I'll start to loosen that, and then we'll do the same on the opposite side. Again, large wrench goes onto the big nut. The only difference here, this also is a nut, it just doesn't have the plunger to open and close the valve. Sometimes you need to get a little bit of clearance from the hose. See how the hose is bending, so I just want to stabilize that a little bit better. And we'll just continue. You don't have to put a lot of torque when you're either tightening it or loosening it. And at some point, we can hand loosen it. We can hear a little air coming out, which just means that we're opening up that cavity. You can hear some air here. You see an O-ring actually came out with that one, so we want to make sure that O-ring, I'm just going to put it on here for right now, but we want to make sure that O-ring fits right back into that little slot because that's a part of the banjo fitting right there. And I'll do the same thing here. Be careful with the O-ring. Sometimes the O-rings can get compressed. This one has an O-ring still in it. And then what I'll do here is I'm just going to pull this assembly off like that. At this point, what I want to do is go ahead and put this O-ring back in it. Sometimes a little bit of a sealant can help with that. A non-petroleum based, so no Vaseline, but type sealant like you could use a silicone based sealant, just really lightly to keep it lubricated. A dielectric grease works best. And these nuts are interchangeable at this point. If I want to further pull these out to check the seal there, which is what we're going to do, then I'll continue. Just a little bit of loosening with the wrench. I'll pull it out. And this is a flat washer here. And some of these, what you'll see is that it's not a flat washer, it's actually an O-ring, but that serves as a nut. We'll keep these together, although they can be interchangeable. And then we'll do the same on this side. And now we have two flanges that are identical. At this point, go ahead and inspect for any debris or anything like that inside the flange. See if there are any sort of cracks or leaks. In here, I don't see any. It all looks good and solid. I don't see any junk in there. You could at this point, you could take a rag and you can just wipe it, or a slight air gun. You want to try not to blow more debris in there, so wipe it first, pull out any sort of sand or grit if there is any, and then from there you could go ahead and blow it with a blow gun. Okay, in this case, what we're going to go ahead and do is we want to make sure that these flanges are tight enough, and typically they are, but sometimes these can loosen over time. And there are a couple ways to do that. What we'll just use is a dedicated tool for this. It's actually, you can also get some oil filter wrenches that are similar to this. This one works very nicely, and we'll grab around most of our flange edges. It's got some aggressive teeth, so we want to be careful. If you feel like you really don't want to mar the edge at all, you can also use a little bit of tape just to build up around it. But for the most part, I'll be careful with it. And what I'm going to just do is there's an outer flange and an inner flange, similar to this. You have to be very careful not to allow the inner flange to fall into the tube. It's put in there, it's initially installed when the tube is built, and when it's thermally welded together and that assembly is put together. So if you just automatically pull this out, this falls in, and then you got to figure out a way to fish it out, which we can show you how to do also. But that's as basic as this. These two fit together, and the fabric squeezes between, and this finds seal against the fabric on both sides. So in this case, we're going to show you how to go ahead and loosen the flange. This can often initially be done easier if you did it with air in the tube, but because we want to show you how to pull apart the crossover first, I didn't do that. But it's a flush facing tool. You just grab right into it lightly, and then we'll try and rotate it. Again, air makes this process a lot easier in the tube, just to initially crack the seal, and then you come back and you loosen it. There we go. And this too then should get to a point, you don't have to be overly aggressive, you don't want to over tighten these. It's like any kind of a good rubber seal. You want to rely on the material to seal it. We'll continue to do that. At this point then it's hand tight, and the whole inside and outside are coming apart. So there are a number of different tools you can use to make that happen. The most basic to retain that back flange is to actually take something like a pencil or a small paintbrush that's broken off to a size you can actually fit it in there, but you'll tie a knot on the end of it, a cinching knot, and with a piece of tape as a keeper that you'll then put inside and make it about 4 inches long. You can actually slide inside and then hold it up against the face so it actually bites into the back of those little grooves, and so you hold tension against it while you then continue to pull the other piece off. Green tape just to ensure that the thread doesn't slide off of there. In this case, what I've got is a dedicated tool that we designed built out of a few pieces of metal. It actually came from a garbage composter tool from Home Depot. I put a string on it as well. We ground it down. The idea here is it feeds in. I pull back and I hold that against the flange and just keep some tension against it, and I continue then to loosen this portion of the flange by hand, and voila, I've got tension still on the back, so the back flange is staying in place inside. I can pull this out, I can replace it, and then I can put it back in. Pretty as simple as that. So I'm going to go ahead and put it back in. So I'm holding tension with the string, holding tension here. Of course, two sets of hands can often help make this job easier, as long as you don't have fumbly hands on the other side. I'm still holding tension. If I were doing this just with the string and a pencil or a small paintbrush that I snapped in half, anything on the back side, I'd be doing the exact same thing. It's as simple as get it to a point where it's getting hand tightened. I'm still holding the flange in the back, and there we go. I'm just going to check it to make sure that I didn't actually inadvertently do something dumb, and there we have it. That's with the wrench in the same way in which I loosened it before. Just hand tight, don't overdo it, and a little bit at a time, just an eighth of a turn at a time will get you a long ways with it. And you want to get it mostly assembled at this point, mostly tightened, so that later when you do tighten it down with air in it, you're not also rotating the components that go into the slot. Okay, but that's replacing a flange. That way if we had a crack or a problem, we can simply replace it with a new flange. Now we're going to go back and how to install an assembly back into these, whether we've serviced them or replaced the crossover valve assembly, etc. The process, we want to make sure we have seals, that the threads are good and clean. We'll take one nut, in this case, and we'll thread it back in. Hand tighten it, don't use a wrench initially or you can cross thread it. You can take it down to hand tight and there's a seal, then later I'll come back and add a little bit with the wrench. We'll put the next one in. Key will just be methodical and be consistent in how you do it. You get a lot with just hand tight. You don't need it really torqued down. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take it and I'm going to just tighten it down just a bit. Another quarter turn. If you're really torquing down on this thing, you will strip it or you can crack a flange. You just don't need to. It's high grade plastic and good seals and you let the material do the work itself to seal it. So we're going to then go ahead and take the banjo fitting. Now what's key is there's a small O-ring on either side. You want to make sure those are in good shape, good quality, they're in place. Those can have a tendency to fall out. In this case, 1, 2, 3, 4. We have the O-rings in place. Everything looks clean. There are no obstructions, no salt buildup. And we will go ahead and hold this in place like this. In this case, what I prefer to do is just keep the sharp parts of the Oetiker, which has fewer sharp edges than any other band clamp, endless band clamp, but still it's steel and has sharp edges. I'll put these so they're facing down and least likely to impact anything. And I'm going to take the first nut, which is the plunger, and I'm going to put it in the aft end of the boat. And I'm just going to continue to ensure that the seals are in place and the seals aren't impacted, the two O-rings aren't impacted by my putting this in. There we go. I hear the positive thread lock. And all by hand. Don't have to be over aggressive. Looks like the O-ring is still seated here. Everything looks like it's seating down properly. That's one. The plunger works. 2. And I'm just going to kind of hand feed it in there. I may just use this not to tighten it, but to kind of hold things in place. In this case, that part, I see there's still a bit of gap. So I'll tension it down. I don't see O-rings, which means that the O-rings have probably found a good seat. I'm going to continue to pay attention to that. And I'll just use a 1 thumb rule. I should be pushing this with a thumb. The final turns, and I can just feel those O-rings clamping down. Receding. Same thing here. At this point, what I also want to do then is to go ahead and just make sure that these are properly set before I do the final tightening on the outside. And I just want to stabilize that hose so it doesn't want to twist upwards in the process. That's good. Final tension here. You can see we're still getting some spin there. Everything should be seated. It works, functioning, and you should be good to go. I'll do a final check once I get the air back in the chambers. I'll just do a final tightening, just no more than a quarter turn, hopefully, maybe an eighth of a turn on these flanges, because by then pressure will set out, and that actually helps seal the flanges as well. That's a full crossover replacement.